Thank you so much to Ada and to the MaD team who's taken such good care of us since we've arrived here in Hong Kong. And also, obviously, to the Jockey Club and to Louise and the Six folks. We really appreciate the opportunity to come here and to speak to you. And I look forward, hopefully, to having good conversations with everyone during the rest of the day. So I am the executive director of the Public Policy Lab in New York City. We are the first design lab, nonprofit design lab for government in the United States, founded in 2011. We're just about to hit our 8th anniversary. We're nonprofit and nonpartisan, so we're not part of a government agency, but rather outside of government. And we focus on poor and at-risk Americans, primarily in New York City, but also we work on a federal or national level and with municipalities across the United States. The focus really for us is on low-income and marginalized populations because we really feel like that is where this kind of a social innovation approach is most critical and needed. We design both policies and services. So what that means is that we work both on the level of the individual interaction between a member of the public and a government agency, which is providing a service to them. But we also work with government leaders and government executives who are trying to think more strategically about how they or their operation or organization can address the needs of members of the public. So here are a couple of questions that we're frequently asked at gatherings like this. So I thought I'd discuss them here briefly, and then you can follow up with me more later if you have further questions. So what are our skills and methods? We have many, we maintain. Primarily around research. We do ethnographic research with members of the public and with public servants during the course of our projects. We do design, so we create visual and material representations of systems and interactions, as well as actually tangible digital and physical artifacts that people can use and interact with. We conduct field and pilot tests of the services, interactions, and policies that we design. So we don't simply create things and then turn them over to our public partners, but rather we test them in real-world contexts so we can identify whether or not they're working before we leave the scene. And finally, we do formative monitoring and evaluation of our projects so that we can tell over time what kind of impact they're having in the lives of people and the lives of our public partners. How do we find projects? Typically, I think as happens really throughout the world, our projects come to us through our relationships. So we form close relationships with people who are in executive positions in public agencies, particularly in New York, and then they kindly refer us to others. Occasionally, we will have a source of funding from a funder like, say, the Jockey Club, or an equivalent in the US, who will say, we'll support you to engage around a particular topic area. And in those instances, we have sometimes reached out to a broad pool of agencies to say, do you have some issue in this space which you'd like us to participate with you in exploring? But often it's people coming to us and saying, hey, we have this problem. Will you work with us to solve it? And then how are we funded? We're funded primarily through fees for our services. We function essentially as a nonprofit consultant, which are paid to us by government entities themselves, or sometimes by charitable organizations, essentially on behalf of government entities. So a little bit about the context in which we do our work before I go any further. This is New York City. This is the view from the roof of the Public Policy Lab across the East River looking at Manhattan. And from this height, it all looks very glossy. It all looks like a lovely, delightful place to be. But in fact, New York City is huge and messy. It's about 8 million people, 3 million of whom are foreign-born. There are 800 languages spoken in New York City, about 130 of them by a pretty sizable population. New York City itself has something like 6 or 7 official languages that government materials and publications are released in. And about 50% of households in New York City speak a language other than English at home. Further, about 20% of those households live below the US poverty line, which is $18,000 for a family of 3. This in one of the most expensive cities in the world. So that's a good fifth of the population. Another 25% on top of that live within 150% of the poverty line. So although there are people in the city who are living lives of unimaginable wealth, there are also people who are struggling with really deep poverty. And a lot of the questions that we face are frankly questions of poverty. And finally, this is a map of how poverty is clustered across the city. This is a map of the poorest communities in the city. That little blue star is where the Public Policy Lab is located. This is also a map, though, of racial segregation. The United States has a shameful history of racial segregation, and still that persists even today in terms of segregated neighborhoods, primarily of non-white Americans, where also poverty is concentrated. So race is a persistent question that underlies much of our work. So a few quick thoughts here about where we intervene. So we can apply our approaches and methods at multiple points in a sort of policy decision cycle. And the fundamental question that we're often trying to answer is this one, about the gap between the intentions of policymakers and how that actually plays out for members of the public. And really, we see that there's this kind of shift in mindset between how policymakers think and act and the lived experience of members of the public. Now, that plays out, that gap or that distinction, at multiple points in the policy generation cycle. And we work in all of these points. I would say often that the process of getting to policy generation forces one to sort of circle back to problem recognition. And I would also say that in our work, typically evaluation and iteration or decommissioning of services is not often high on the agenda of the policymakers with whom we work. So those are probably the areas in which we have worked least, simply because there's lack of opportunity there. Now, in terms of a couple of extremely quick examples of how we actually do this work. So we have worked with the City of New York on social housing, on the process by which New Yorkers apply for and are awarded apartment units in the city's subsidized housing stock. We've worked with the city's Department of Education to identify ways for low-income families to apply for public benefits like food assistance and income assistance in the context of their child's public school, because a school is a kind of safe-feeling environment, often a place where people feel more relaxed and trustworthy than the context of a government social service office. Right now, we're working on the second phase of our benefits access work. We're working on a big project around homelessness services. The city has something like 70,000 people sleeping in homeless shelters every night, and we're working with the city to identify ways to help people move to permanent housing. We're also doing some work around the public realm in terms of better coordination of streetscape construction in commercial neighborhoods, and also helping small businesses understand how to comply with accessibility regulations. Just to refer you to a place where you can find more information about this and many of our projects, on our website, publicpolicylab.org, you'll find extensive project case studies and documentation. And I can also refer you to two other websites that focus on our interest around the delivery of mental health services. There's one called Design Patterns for Mental Health, and another one called NYC Well Design Tools. And both of those have resources for people who are interested in using a design approach to develop better services for people dealing with mental illness. Thank you very much. I look forward to speaking with you further.